I'm so glad to have you join me, Andrew. Very late at night, I might say, my time, and in the morning, your time. But hey ho, here we go. You're looking suitably awake, even if I may not be. How are you?
I'm good. Happy New Year to you, Catherine. Happy New Year to everyone. Yeah, yeah. No, I've just got up. I know it's late where you are, so one of us had to stay up late, so it's my job to
Well,
keep you
well,
up.
that's true, but because I'm up late because I'm like writing Land Cycle Investor for Saturday, and it's this beginning of the year phase where we're in January and we're in 2026, and goodness knows how long I've been writing about in 2026, and when we get to 2026, the peak of the cycle, and it just seems to have come so quickly. Last week I interviewed Fred Harrison to get his take of, well, here we are. What do you think, Fred? And now all the yearly reports are coming out from different forecasters. And of course, you've just written yours, which is one, I'm so excited to talk to you about it because I've heard little bits about it. I haven't read it yet, but I need to, key my subscribers up as to what's coming up in the year ahead. My report on Saturday will be looking at the 36-year cycle, which I decided very late in the week on the spur of the moment I would have a look at. And I know that's a cycle that you've gone into in your
It
annual
is.
report. But this is we've done quite a few interviews together. So let me frame this right first of all. The reason that I've done a lot of interviews with you is because out of everybody that forecasts cycles, I believe that pretty much you're the only one that can forecast key turning points month on month that has a track record that cannot be disputed. And the reason I say that is because when you put out your monthly reports that has these key timing indicators for the markets, for multiple markets over that month. Every time you release a new report, you go back and back test what has happened, what has worked, and you're very transparent with that data. So the analysis is sound. So anybody who is an active trader in the market that wants to invest in those reports is highly recommended to do so. But also, for goodness knows how long now you've been researching cycles. You have had extensive experience in Gann's work, cataloguing his material, which nobody else can lay claim to. So you know his work intimately, and so you look at a range of cycles, and that's why you're in today because you've released your annual report, and I want to give my subscribers, well, first of all, an overview of some of the historical things that are in that report, but secondly, also a chance to purchase that report for themselves if they want to. So they not only have, my analysis of what's coming out for the year ahead in terms of the land cycle and whether this is going to be the year of the collapse or whether it's not going to be the year of the collapse, whether we're looking at that might push into 2027, but also your analysis that goes into some of the nitty gritty as well. Where shall we start? What was, when you went to put together this report, what are the key cycles that you were looking at?
At the moment, the 36-year cycle is converging. We'll talk about that in a minute. You've already mentioned that. In answer to your question, how do I do these forecasts? One of the master cycles is the 90-year cycle. Gann spoke about that. He actually said 60 years was the master cycle. But if you look in some of his rarer work, he does talk about the 90-year cycle is greater than the 60-year cycle. And that's something I've spoken about a lot. I think I think we've spoken about it. Maybe we haven't spoken about it that much, but I cover it a lot in the reports and have been for the last 5 years, 6 years. This 90-year overlay. In fact, more than that, because we were expecting a market top back in 2019, which would be 90 years on from 1929, and the top came in on the 15th, 17th February. So it was only within 6 weeks of a 90-year tolerance, and that was the pandemic cycle. And of course, that coincided with the 100-year cycle. So one of the key points, this idea of confluence of cycles, where cycles come together, where we're all in the same place at the same time, something happens. And let's stick with that 90-year cycle because we've seen how the world has gone from globalization to polarization. And if we look back 90 years, we see the rise of Nazism, we see the rise of Hitler. And the rise of Hitler in itself is pretty interesting because when he became chancellor, I think we've got to go back to about 1932, you'll find that Germany was really hit by reparations from the Great War, which had by now finished 14 years earlier. And they've got this point where um, um, Germany had enough. The people, they'd been through hyperinflation with the Weimar Republic. They were constantly being taken for more and more and more after the Great War. And so it was a time to use the phrase "make Germany great again." That is the phrase that was used. Okay, now just remember that. And then we went from subtle. So he succeeded a guy called Hindenburg, and Hindenburg was seen to be a weak leader, acquiescing to the demands of the Allies, and there was no sign of Germany getting any better. So Hitler rose up as a strongish leader, and at first all his policies seemed to be pretty reasonable. But then, as we saw, things sort of got more and more momentum. They became more extreme. And, one of the things that happened last year, well, let's go back 90 years to September 1935. And at the Nuremberg rallies, he suddenly made it law to discriminate against Jewish folk, and not just Jewish folk, but other minorities. So it was around about the 15th to 17th there, and it became a law. So it was the making of this, total discriminatory underclass. But you go forward 90 years to the day, and a guy called Tommy Robinson, that you might have heard of, had this rally in London where 110,000 people came along. Now, the rally was ostensibly, now this is the point really, it was just ostensibly complaining about illegal immigration here and invited people of all backgrounds. But in fact, if you look at the past of somebody like Tommy Robinson, he has got a fairly lengthy criminal record for anti-Islamist behavior, for violent behavior, and so on. So it was a veil. But the point was, and this is a really critical point, was it was something that was seen as extreme that made it open to everyone. Okay, it sucked everybody into this. As I say, in Britain, over 110,000 people went. A lot of them say we're not racist. Black people went along and so on, coloured people, and saying, no, it's just about we don't want to pay taxes for illegal migrants. But in fact, the underlying thread is far more extreme. And that's the sort of energy we're seeing. Now, what also happened on this theme was, look at what's going on in America. We're seeing a lot of deportation of illegal aliens. Some of them have been there for 30, 40 years, settled, integrated, and pay all their taxes and all the rest of it. So you can see some parallels, you can see some certain parallels of what's going on. And you can see, Hitler said Germany needed more room to expand. Now, let me just make this very clear, because, some of you watching this will be Trump supporters. I remain apolitical in all this. So I just want to make this very clear that in order to understand history, you cannot back any particular side. You cannot back your own politicians. Privately, you can do what you like, your own faiths and all the rest of it. You've got to look and see why all the different parties do this. And you can see a lot of parallels where as I say, so Germany needed room to expand. They were looking at Austria and Hungary and so on. And Lebensraum, it was called. And so we got this 90-year cycle. Certain countries now are looking to expand. They might need Greenland suddenly. Well, they need, these things for the minerals. And I wrote about this 2 years ago, that the Arctic would be the next battlefield, as it were. So that was something, together with global warming, so it was opening up sea routes that were potentially being blocked by the warfare in Aden, the Houthi rebels blocking the Straits and the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So you can see flavors of this sort of stuff going in and happening, and we're seeing it in Britain as well. They've got Britain's got a very weak Labour government who's just taxing the middle classes and the rich, and we're going from bad to worse. And the stock market has made a new high, and the lady chancellor who's taxing everybody to death, saying, "Look, it's all working." It's just absolute nonsense. So we're in a different situation. We're in a situation where we are ripe for somebody to come along and sort of take the helm here. We've got Nigel Farage cooking away, and in fact, we talked about. So we've talked about the 81 to 84 year revolutionary cycle. I covered it extensively in this book here. And what we saw, that book came out in 2017. And I'm not sure if we've ever covered this with you because it's like old news. But that point, we've just been talking about the 90-year cycle because that's where we've got to with it. But if you go back to 2016, 2017, and you head back 81 to 82, 84 years. So this is the revolutionary cycle. That takes you to 1932, which is exactly the point I've just been talking about. The rise of Hitler. Hitler becomes chancellor, albeit on a pretty reasonable manifesto. Then we go back another 81 to 84 years, and that takes us to 1848. Now, I don't know if you've studied history, but 1848, in January 1848, Karl Marx and his buddy Frederick Engels write the Communist Manifesto. And that basically says, workers, rise up, break free off your chains. Now, what had been happening back in the run up to 1848 was that Britain had been going through the Industrial Revolution, and people had been leaving the agrarian economy. They'd been leaving the farmland. They'd been coming into the mills in Yorkshire and Lancashire and all over the north and everywhere across Britain. And the Jeff Bezoses of the day were really using these guys as slave labor. They were using child labor, but Britain was industrializing. And so the workers had had enough back in 1848. This was released in January 1848. And Engels, he was an interesting guy. He was actually from a very, very wealthy background. He was from the oligarchical elite at the time. So it was quite interesting that he was involved with this. But the story doesn't stop there, because we can go back one further revolution, and that takes us to the Stamp Act in America. And that really is what precipitated the American Revolution. We're now back in 1765, where Britain is saying, send more taxes, send more taxes, send more taxes. So you've got these three loops back. And what happened when we got to 2016-17, we got a modern day revolution. It was about Trump 1.0. It was about Nigel Farage. Okay. So if we take that point and say, well, if we're in 2016 or 2017, and that's the 81 to 84 year cycle, and you take that up to the 90-year cycle, well, that's where we are right now, right? Well, this is the 90-year cycle. But let me go back to the American Revolution one more time. So the three cycles of revolution that take us back to 1765, to the Stamp Act, and then to 1776, they equate to 250 years, right? Roughly, give or take, right? And basically, if you double that up back from 2017, the 500-year cycle would take you to October the 31st, 1517, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, and he started the Protestant Reformation. He is the first person really to go out there and proactively, threaten Catholicism and the Pope. So what happened, what we're in right now, people of our age and generation and so on, we are in a 500-year cycle from this cultural and religious, challenge and revolution. Then we've got all the minor cycles coming in together. So it's pretty interesting. So those are, the revolutionary cycles. Now let's talk about that revolutionary cycle right now. If we take that back one revolution, it takes us into the Second World War. Okay. And if we take that back another revolution, it takes America back into the Civil War. And then if you take it a further revolution back, it's going to slip from 1765 to the actual revolution. And of course, as Trump's saying, this is 250 years. It's a great celebration, making America great again. So those really are the cycles. We talked about a 250-year cycle there. We talked about a 90-year cycle. And we've talked about this 82 to 84-year cycle. And it's the synthesis of those cycles that I do. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, and very comprehensively. Thank you. I mean, it's fascinating, sort of looking at the history and the historical repeats. What I was curious about is to here we are in 2026, and it is about this forecasting forward. So, like we've said, you can look back at these patterns and think, this is amazing. And then when you're trying to unravel, okay, what does it mean for the future? Where are we heading now for the future? I think 2026 is this point. And even Fred Harrison, and Fred looks, he's a historian himself. You've met Fred.
He's a journalist. Yeah, he's a journalist by profession. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, such an exciting meeting, I think, because we're all sort of talking about this from different angles. But Fred was the inspiration for many of us to get involved in it, particularly that came from the Georgist lens. And I interviewed him last week, and he was calling for world war in 2026. at the peak of this land cycle before anybody else was. It's been around longer than we've been around, and right from when he was, started writing about the cycle, this was where it was heading for him, just from the fact of a historical perspective. But how do you forecast that in 2026? What would you say then? Here we are in 2026. These cycles are converging. What's next?
There's two things going on. The bigger picture backdrop is 2029, 100 years on from the 1929 market crash, and it's 90 years on from the outbreak of the Second World War. So that's a big point. Now, it might be that all this work's got out there, but so that's a 100-year and a 90-year cycle. But if we bring the revolutionary cycle in, that's a bit shorter, and that's triggering now. Okay, there are certain aspects of that more when in the precise breakdown of that cycle that does see America go into war when it gets to that point of the cycle. So you can see effectively that's what's going on right now. It's suddenly getting quite aggressive. It has become the aggressor. There are and the other mutterings are things like, not mutterings, but Trump was actually a month ago, he was talking about looking after Christian interests in Nigeria. I honestly don't think he does care about Christian interests in Nigeria, but I do think he cares about the fact that Nigeria is the 15th greatest producer of oil, I think the 15th or 17th. And I've spent quite a bit of time in West Africa as well. So the idea is, what's this all about? Well, it's in the report. It's all covered in depth in the report, but the overview is, I think he wants to cut off the supply of oil to China. So he wants to control the countries that supply oil. And I think that's what it's about. And why has he done this? Well, this is where, when people start pointing about, oh, well, they're picking on us, they're doing this. Well, who started the tariff war, right? So Trump started the tariff war with China. And then let's just hold that. Let me forget. Let me come back to this Nigeria thing and that whole situation. Last year, in last year's report, I told you what would happen with tariffs, because McKinley brought them in 1.5 90-year cycles back, 3 lots of 45-year cycles. We went back to 1890. McKinley brought the tariffs in to help pick up American manufacturing. And what happened? In fact, it was an own goal, in as much as America saw the farmers ended up paying, the price of tractors went up 6-fold. These tariffs backfired, and McKinley lost the midterm elections, and Harrison took over from there. So what happened here was this idea, again, making America great again, keeping it isolationist. It backfired. So if you go to America now, which industries are closing down? Distilleries are closing down. The bourbon industry, which is pretty big, that is in a really dire situation. Because nobody's buying, the Canadians are no longer buying American bourbon. That's it. So you can see the impact of tariffs tends to be an own goal. So coming back to the China situation, Trump imposes tariffs on China, and there is this sort of lack of understanding. Well, I'm going to put tariffs on them, but if they do anything back at me, that's just not allowed. And that's the same sort of concept. So they retaliated with the rare earths. Well, America needs rare earths more than anywhere. China has them. The reason China has control of so much of the inventory of rare earths is because China has moved across. This is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, or historically the very exciting Silk Route. If you've been to any of those countries, I've spent time in Almaty, in Kazakhstan. All these places are really stunning old places. But what's happened is the Chinese influences moved further and further across. And then when America pulled out of Afghanistan, and, whether it was, they blamed it on Biden, but it was actually Trump who sanctioned it in this previous administration. It doesn't matter who. It's not about pointing fingers. They moved out very quickly. And China had already been making inroads into this area here. So Afghanistan is one of the biggest countries with rare earths. So they came across there. And, so China controls all this sort of stuff effectively. So, of course, what happened then was that they fired. So Trump says sanctions on China. China says, OK, well, you can't have rare earths, or sanctions on rare earths. So Trump is now mad, and he knows the weak spot is oil. So whereas China been getting its oil from Venezuela, it's not about narcotics. That's a load of nonsense, and it's not about Christians in Nigeria. So he's trying to cut off the flow of oil. Now, let me just make one other point. With China extending its influence through Afghanistan, and if you've got a map of that area, you'll have a look. You'll see they're now next to Iran, which is effectively an interesting country. It's quite friendly there. And if Chinese influence in Iran was to rise, then China would have a direct route all the way from Beijing or from the coast, from the ancient city of Shanghai, all the way through to the Straits of Hormuz. And that is a big problem for America.
Yes.
But nobody seems to point. I mean, this is just I've had these are just my thoughts. This is it.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
I sit in this
yeah.
room way too long and way too much.
No, no.
So
Yeah, I mean that's how I've always seen it. I mean, you need to see these things in terms of what are absolute American interests and what are absolute Chinese interests. I mean, you can argue about China's launch of try to dominate the South China Sea, and why it's building its Belt and Road, its extended Belt and Road,
yeah,
because that is absolutely vital to its survival. So the thought that it's going to behave itself and just sit back and just come by its way through this is just not going to happen. I mean, China is going to use every bit of manipulation it's got on its side for the to advantage from the nations that are allowing it to expand its Belt and Road and expand its trade routes, and America's going to be playing exactly the same game. So I agree totally with what you're saying. Actually, interestingly enough, about the trade sanctions, that the same was done 100 years ago in the lead up to the 1930s. In fact, that they put
yeah,
tariffs. Sorry, yeah, and so
yeah.
that extended the 1930s downturn. So we've seen this this lean to nationalism, and then it kind of undermined the economic structure as you're leading up to these weak points in the cycle. Previously we've sort of seen that happen. But no, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's following this idea of the resources and what is benefiting each country, which is very important. And we know with Venezuela, that it's was supplying China and supplying Russia, and of course, the China, Russia, Iranian bloc there. That's not going to be beneficial for America. And Trump has the bravado and the confidence and the backing to be able to act. And why would he not do so? Why would we think that a man of his personality I mean, David Murray, when I interview him, loves to promote the aspects of the narcissist of Donald Trump. But then, at the same time, he does understand land and he does understand resources, and he's not hiding that fact. I mean, he didn't come out and say, we got hold of Venezuela because, it was a humanitarian and lack of democracy and whatever else. He came straight out and said oil. It's important and we're going to take it. We're not going to let them.
But America's always done that. I just wanted to add one more thing to the China thing. Let's come back to this Venezuela thing and the Central America and South America issue. So the reason China's so dominant right now is that we've just seen the Long March started in October 1934 and it lasted for a year to October 1935. And that was effectively the rise of communism as we know it right now, the Communist Party that runs China right now. So this is the 90-year cycle from that. So China is now starting a whole new 90-year cycle, and it's probably on the up. I know the Western nations will say, "Oh well, the economy is screwed and this and that," but coming back to Venezuela, America, first of all, if you look at the amount, so part of this again, this is covered in depth in the report, but the idea is that America so. If we go back 36 years, Catherine, 36 years to 1990, right? What you'll see is Saddam Hussein rolled the tanks into Kuwait. And that really was the trigger for America to escalate its intervention in in the Middle East. All right. So that started when we got to January 1991, I think it was the third week, it was Operation Desert Storm. Then we went through all the different campaigns and we got Gulf War II after 9/11 and so on. And it just went on and on and on. And then we had Syria, all these things going on. America was so focused on controlling things in the Middle East that it kind of took its eye off the ball. Meanwhile, China expanded into Africa, into a lot of the places that have the minerals. And America, when it's intervened in Central America, all these other places, including the Middle East, tends to sort of take control of it, tends to have a puppet or government or something, and then typically the American nations benefit from it. China was a little bit more subtle, and the subtlety there is that they actually put some infrastructure in for the local people. They put in a few hospitals and schools and roads and so on. So they're kind of not seen as the baddie baddies, as it were. And but in all these cases, all these countries are now that they are indebted literally to these nations. Now, China also moved very heavily into South America. The importance of this is China needs soybeans, it needs grains. Brazil, Argentina, big producers of grains. It's got a huge presence there now. And if you look at the nations that Trump's talking about, he's talking about Colombia, he's talking about Venezuela. Look at a map. The next to that is Guyana and Suriname. This is effectively trying to build a wall because China is now very proximate to America. China's also has put a lot of investment into the Caribbean. Let me see, was it Jamaica? Oh, I wasn't actually there recently, but they have built a ring road there. And Barbados, when the Brits pulled out of Barbados 5 years ago, that China put in a lot of investment in the hotels there as well. So China is investing economically. It's work. Its confrontation or war method of war is through economics, and I've written a little bit about Sun Tzu in the latest report for those of you who studied the art of war because it's very relevant. But again, you can read that in the report. So the point here is that China is moving and has been moving very rapidly. It's the 90-year cycle from the Long March, and basically Trump has had to do something about it. That's just my opinion. Others would say it's something else, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree. I suppose the question is, I mean, we're seeing a lot of things sort of happen globally. I mean, we haven't sort of touched on the protests that are happening in Iran and, the potential collapse of that regime or what it might mean for that regime and then what it might, do in the Middle East. And yeah,
Well,
I
this
think
is the
that.
same story. This is exactly the same story. Trump is not interested in protecting the protesters at all. He's interested in the oil. He's interested in installing a regime that's pro America, which he did have under the Shah of Iran. That came down in 1979, 45 years ago, 2 years ago. So we're 47 years in. So, yeah, I mean, it's not about protesters at all. It's about manipulation and oil and control. And that was it, really.
Mm.
Yeah.
Which you can understand, and I think this has always been my argument. I mean, can you blame a leader of a country, of the biggest economy in the world, for protecting its interests, or for its land grabs, for its desire to build its own empire? I mean, to think that you're going to get somebody that's going to come and play a different game from the one that's historically been played is not necessarily. You don't have to like it, but this is what we would expect to happen. Under
Yeah, well, and in fact, this is at the very beginning. I said you've got to look at all of this impartially. So if China says actually, so no, you're in Australia. I presume you're an Australian. I know you're from a British background, but it's like, well, we're proud Australians. Well, China says actually we're going to grab Australia because there's a lot of minerals there, and if they march in with huge force, they could take Australia. And I think actually the deal is, or the deal was, China takes all the Austral Asia Pacific, and Russia was going to take Europe, but I think Russia's considerably weakened right now, and America would be America. But say, well, you have to be careful how you phrase that because literally doing that same thing, I could say, well, could you blame the Chinese for saying they're going to grab Australia? So you have to be careful. Is there any proximate relationship from America to Iran? No, there isn't. So arguably, Iranian, actually take Iran out of it, but Persian interest, because the history of Persia is far greater than a lot of civilizations. Persian interest, you can't. No, it's intervention, it's interfering, but it's okay because it's okay. That's what goes on. If you've got the might and the money, you can interfere, and that's exactly what these big nations do. Every nation's done it. This is called colonization. Great Britain did it in India, did it across all of so many parts of Africa, you name it. The Caribbean, and that's just what the leading nations of the day do. So
Mm.
so You say, can you blame it? Well, I mean, what's the argument for, if you're a reasonable Iranian, it's like, well, why is America interfering here? If you're a reasonable Australian and the next thing is China have taken over Australia, you can't, by your argument, you say, well, actually, it's understandable. They're such a big nation. They've come and helped themselves to us. We've only got a small population and a small defense force. So I think that's the issue, is that you can't look at it. To look at cycles and geopolitics, you've got to understand the arguments from each different side. And, because that's why these conflicts occur. And right now, America does basically, the big problem for America is it's created so much debt. The debt is out of control. The dollar is incredibly stressed because it's been printed and printed and printed. And that's been the policy since the early 1900s. Keep printing money, and then your citizens' house prices are going to go up. So they bought it for 10,000, they retire, it's worth 200,000. They got money for retirement supposedly, and everybody's happy and everybody feels well off. Whereas, you're the expert on this. You look at the true value of land and the value of housing and so on. It's different. So yeah, I just sort of come in on this idea that you can understand a land grab, but actually, it's about global domination. And what's going to happen now is the issues are that actually there is oil in Iran, there is oil in Persia, and basically everybody wants that area because strategically it's in a very important place. It's a very old nation. I've spent time in Tehran, and there's a city called Esfahan, which is like something out of a Harrison Ford movie. It's just Indiana Jones. It's just incredibly stunning. You look at this old culture, but it does have oil, and it's in a geographically strategically important point.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the regimes that control those areas aren't necessarily regimes that you would want to live under. They're very oppressive on compared to what we are used to in our democratic, soft Western nations. But there's a few things to sort of go into that. I mean, I think America's worry as well is it's losing its reserve currency status. I mean,
Exactly.
if it loses
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
with the debt that it's got, then it really is in trouble, compared to where it sits now, where it can sort of manage and has been managing that dynamic. So, it does need to maintain its control and its dominance over oil, and the fact that, that is the dollar remains the reserve currency.
Well,
But
that's the whole point. I mean, if you were to
yeah.
look at that right now and say, if we were going to start a reserve currency now, would you look at the dollar? Of course you wouldn't, because it's been printed to death, but it was the petrodollar, and that is what they're struggling to preserve. That is, in my opinion, just in my word, that is just one of the threads. Yeah, yeah.
Mm, So I mean the way and I know you don't go into this, but I also know that you're very aware of it. The fact that you don't write about it, the Astro side of it. But of course, the 36-year cycle is the Saturn Neptune cycle, and it is it's uncanny kind of how you see those two forces working out. The Saturn being very structural, and the idea that this is about structure, this is about rules, this is about regime, this is about real things, and then Neptune being all about illusion and the breakdown of that structure. And of course, when you get that conjunction, this is what you're seeing happening, is those two things rubbing up against each other, which is the way that I see it, sort of globally. And this idea that you can just go in and you can grab land is a breakdown of the rules that we've had, since World War II, which is, we have these, our nations and our territories, and we don't go and grab each other's land blocks, to moving towards more of this kind of sphere of influence, that you have these powers over their regional sphere of influence and what they're allowed to grab as much as they can in that sphere of influence, which of course is where China and Russia have wanted, to sort of structure their way of thinking, which doesn't bode too well for Australia when you word it about China being able to come in and do its land grabs. And the conversations that I have with David Murren are very much on that path. What do you see then? Do you see 2026 as being a year where we are going to have war break out to a point that it could divert spending? Obviously war is more of a bullish thing, in terms of government
Yeah,
spending.
exactly.
We are
It'll crash the markets to start with, then it becomes very bullish because the manufacturing processes have to ramp up big time in conventional warfare. Now, I know David is of the opinion that we wake up one morning and China will have taken out every single US ship, by midnight or something. But Yeah, I don't know. I know David is very knowledgeable about these things, so I defer to him. I do see it as an unlikely scenario myself. But what I do see, if America is extending colonization, I think they must be reasonably thinking that China is going to take Taiwan, and they're not going to do anything about it. Again, I've covered this some very, very precise dates in the report on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
because I
let's
mean,
go
just
back to this. Sorry, I was
well,
going to say, let's go back to this 36-year cycle that you're talking about, because on the 3rd of January 2026, Trump captured Maduro. Yeah. On the 3rd of January 1990, 36 years to the day, America captured or apprehended Manuel Noriega to the day, 36 years to the day. Let's go back 2 days earlier, the 1st of January 2026. Zoran Mamdani was sworn in as New York's first Muslim Asian mayor. And if you go back to the 1st of January 1990, 36 years previously, David Dinkins was flown in as the first African American mayor of New York. So they're kind of these really interesting patterns that work 36 years to the day. Um, the rest of the 36-year cycle, I think you're going to cover this in your report. I've covered it at length about how this impacts the Soviet Union, and I think that you'll see some really interesting correlations there. But I know we want to save that because your people are going to get it from you, and then I've taken it a little bit further back where you can see the importance of this. Now, what we would say is the Soviet Union is in the process of big change. But you talked about that cycle, you talked about structure, and also Neptune does rule oil as well. So this is the quest for oil, but it's also the breaking down of barriers. And so, in answer to your question, which we didn't really finish answering, this idea of the bigger war cycles coming towards the back end of the year, but the shorter revolutionary cycles coming for the 82 to 81 to 84-year cycle is kicking in now for America. And we're also seeing this 36-year cycle coming at the same time. So the synthesis of all this is it's all change. It's a breakdown of the stuff as we know it, and it's potentially inflationary as well. And there is a lot of, by nature of this cycle, you don't know what's going on under the hood of the car, as they say. There's stuff that's hidden away.
so do you feel that we're looking at, we could be looking at China making, this move this year? You haven't ruled that out, I'm assuming,
I'm
that.
not. I've got some very specific dates for. You might be aware I do speak to the government and aspects of the military, and I've provided them with the key dates that I think they need to be aware of. One of the dates was the 7th, which was yesterday, which was the capture of the tankers. Now, that I think is a bit of a flashpoint because it's set a precedent. Because America is now policing in international waters. It was supported by some British intervention as well. So suddenly, you could, if you look at it like most people look at it and say, well, they're just capturing a tanker that was carrying oil that was sanctioned. That's the Western viewpoint. But the other side of it is, well, if you're going to go and grab people's land, you're going to grab people's vessels, then we should do the same. So, why is it okay for, say, Trump to grab Greenland and it's not okay for China to grab Taiwan? That's a question you have to ask yourself. Now, these things for us lie in cycles. Well, for me certainly. So, that what are the Chinese thinking, say about America's behaviors? Well, they've got, and so on. What does each party think? You've got to look at how the other party thinks to really make sense of all this stuff. But yeah, I think we're now going into the world of land grabs. I think Britain's are very much at risk. There's very little money being spent on defence forces. It's very, very disempowered. We don't really have much fighting ability. We're an island. We have a lot of Russian vessels circling. We have submarines going around, cables, like they were cut, like the pipeline was cut coming out of Ukraine. Sorry, out of up in Scandinavia. So we're at risk. We're all at risk of this sort of stuff. It's a case of how robustly you can defend yourself. But one of the things is America has the greatest army in or the greatest military defense forces. So it will steamroller. It will walk in wherever steamroll in wherever it goes. China, I believe, I know far less about that. David Murrin is your man. He does seem to know what they've got, and he thinks their capabilities are far more sophisticated than anything that America has, which might be the case because we don't really know. Russia had reasonable capability, but I don't think it's that robust. Um, so we are at the point of transition, and I think the point is that we are lucky at our ages. We've lived through two, three generations of general peace. We haven't been in the Middle East, so we haven't been in war. And I think typically, if you look at what Gann writes, and again I've covered that in the report about that there comes a point where the world does go into war for all the wrong reasons, and we could be on the precipice of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worry about that is this kind of empire cycle, and we would be foolish to not realize that we're entering that point now where, America is in decline, the breakdown of what's been happening in America and the potential, point where there's going to be this hegemonic battle, between East and West and the pendulum swinging. And of course, when you've been living under a system for, for your lifetime, it's very hard to envisage how this might happen. But that's been David Murren's thesis. He talks about that being two Kondraty cycles, this 112-year, I can't remember what he calls it now. It's not a hegemonic cycle. Is it a hegemonic 112-year cycle or something he calls it, where he puts the two Kondraty cycles together and says that this is a point where you see this, historic shift. You mentioned to me something about in your report that you talk about empires. Do you in the
Yeah.
report where you discuss this in the report where you talk about this potential shifting in
Yeah, yeah. We haven't gone to as much. Well, actually, we have. Yeah, actually, I've covered it in the context of America. Yeah, and this is it. This is an empire peak or turning point. I would actually call it more a change of direction rather than, and a turning point. You know, when I first started looking at it and when I first wrote Zero Hour, basically things then were looking at this idea that America would peak and would see a lot of internal division. Well, we are seeing a lot of internal division, and we are seeing, the gap between rich and poor really extend, and the amount of debt amongst the working classes and so on is incredible. But it's a consumption society, so it isn't doing great. I did have civil war cycles coming in. Now, when we talk about civil war, these civil war cycles are really in for now and accelerating all the way up into next year for America. It's not like so these relate directly back to 1861 to 1865, the Civil War, which was then about North versus South, Republicans versus Democrats, effectively, or the Confederates, and the freeing of the slaves. Now I think it's more about blue versus red, and you can see. I mean, this is going to accelerate right now because Trump's unilateral decisions and some of the speeches that were put out yesterday. It's like, well, we are going to take such. Greenland is ours.
yeah.
Well, you know, Austria belonged to Germany, according to somebody 90 years ago. This is the very same pattern of assertion. It's kind of like, and we will take it because we have the might to do it. And I think that'll be a bit of a game changer if they do it. I wonder if Russia and China would challenge that, and then whether we do see a war over that territory because it's mineral rich, and there's a lot of stuff in there. Having said that, America has been, in there over the last century quite a bit. It has infrastructure in there to take out minerals and so on. So I think if they're going to do land grabs, yeah, the world has become a chessboard which could be moving around very rapidly, and I don't think any nation is safe. The only nations that are likely to be able to play the game properly are going to be China and America. I don't think Russia has the military to do it. This is about military might now. I don't think the allies have really fallen apart. I mean, effectively, America doing this will be, Trump was never a fan of NATO anyway. And I think the other thing is that the cycles for the United Nations are in, and I can see Trump saying he doesn't want the United Nations in New York, because it's all about real estate. They've got some of the most prime real estate there in Manhattan, the United Nations building. So you can see this is a breakdown of international relations.
Yeah.
So where does this leave people? Well, if China were to make a move on Australia, I actually think China does this more subtly and economically, exactly how Sun Tzu said it would be done again. So this is written about Sun Tzu, and the art of war, which is really worth studying, whether you're in business, in trading, or anything. It's a really tremendous book. And they've probably got it right, the way they've operated so far. And you talked about modern democracy a few minutes ago. Democracy isn't actually a natural law; it's something that's brought in. Democracy for America, every 4 years somebody comes in, and on day one they create executive orders to overturn exactly what in 24 hours. Whereas a robust nation like China has had it has a 5 year plan, a 10 year plan, a 20 year plan. It's probably got a 100 year plan. Russia did used to have that sort of stuff, but they can, actually, and that's the tale of two communist nations, is that Russia isn't as organized as it was, whereas China is actually, I would say, is consolidating very, very rapidly. I think it really is quite powerful. And I'm sorry, with China there. So whoever has that resilience is going to win. And I think China's in that situation. I think America's making a push to regain that resilience. It's not going to be popular, but if you look back at the history of the last few centuries, Britannia ruled the waves, and America, up until the Second World War, was always very cautious of Britain. It didn't want to join conflicts because it didn't want to support Britain. And in fact, the Second World War and Pearl Harbor became a turning point when America was forced into the Second World War. And as a result of that, and the policies of Eisenhower and so on, it started getting this global superiority. And then it became, self-named the policeman of the world. Arguably, it was a country that was then encroaching or taking resources from countries it wanted to. And it's done it very successfully with so many small nations, in Central America, Panama, we just talked about Noriega, we're talking about Venezuela right now, Nicaragua, you name it, all these places have seen intervention. And that's part of the ongoing foreign policy. So what Trump is effectively doing is nothing new. He's just escalating the new level here to these huge claims. And his desire to go into Iran is to support the protesters. No, it's to control the oil and overthrow the theocracy. His desire to go into Nigeria to protect Christianity. No, it's to protect the oil and install a government that's pro-American. Although there isn't a huge issue with what's going on in Nigeria as far as America is concerned. But Houston and Lagos, the two cities that were very highly connected because of the oil industry. So this is what it's all about. It's an increase in colonization, and I think if we look back that 250-year cycle, you'll see that in the second half of the 18th century, between 1750 and 1800, colonization was all rife. Again, you can see countries like Belgium were huge colonists, and I mean they're a very small nation now, relatively in the scheme of things. France as well was conquering territory in Africa and also the Caribbean. So it's history repeating itself.
Yeah, well, in terms of, so I don't get too far off track, and is let's talk about markets just briefly. What
Yes.
is this going to do to oil prices?
Well, I'm just looking at the screen here, and we haven't really seen a huge reaction in oil. I mean, it has been coming down now. If from a technical viewpoint, so now we leave the notion of cycles and we go into hard and fast portfolio management and trading and investing. Oil has just been, retesting this level of where it got to, and it's a major technical support level from the major high that we saw and the low back in 2020, where the front month futures traded in negative territory. So we're at that level right now. We have retested it a few times. So I would have to say that this is making a base to go up. And this is WTI. So this is sweet crude. You see, Venezuelan oil is very thick. It's very dense, as it were. It's much more complex to refine. And it wasn't the sort of stuff they wanted in America. But then they changed the refining processes to be able to accommodate that sort of stuff. And then they reverted back. So there's some issues there about that. But really, it's more about stopping the supply of oil to China and Russia.
Mm, mm,
So the other side of it is, if you look at what the smart money is doing through the through my Master Traders course and professional platform, where we chart where the flows of the big commodity money are legally. It's legal insider trading. We can see who is moving what where, i.e., what the smart money is doing, the people that get the oil out of the ground, what the hedge funds are doing, and what the small people are doing. And we look at the variations between them. And we're now starting to see some very clear, what we call it 100, 100, 100 readings, which is a sign of that's getting very bullish. So I'm of the opinion that we might well be in a position to see, or we might be in a situation where we do see a move in the prices of oil. Now, a lot of this has probably already been anticipated, and as an argument that the need for oil hasn't been so great. So that's where we are with it at the moment. But in answer to your question, I would favour oil to the upside than to the downside.
Mm, mm. And before I flake totally because it's gone midnight here, and I'm eager to sort of get to the other question that I know my subs will want to know. So I won't comment too much on the oil thing. I mean, I know that the forecast, I think this resonance is actually with the 19, into the peak of the 1970s, which I've spoken about quite a few times. But in markets in general, we've been forecasting the peak of this cycle for a long time in 2026. There's significant flashpoints, aren't there, in 2026 that traders are going to need to look out for. I mean, obviously they can
Yeah.
sign up for your product in that, but even though we're not necessarily, forecasting an absolute collapse of markets in 2026, this is a year that's got volatility to it. It's not a year that's going to be like 2025 was, where there was this, even though we had those flashpoints that happened in 2025, the overall trend of 2025 was up, which we did see, not quite as much as maybe other years ending in five, but certainly we did see that. 2026 is different in your opinion, right? As a
Well,
roadmap.
2026, I think we do have to be in all the traditional forecasting systems that I use, and there are many. There is nothing there suggesting that we might have a crash. But there are some economic cycles that are coming together that are clashing with geopolitical cycles. And I think we might well see, again, this is covered at length in the report with some clear time windows, but so we might see some very volatile markets. And I think that's going to be quite big. I think there's going to be a bigger financial event this year than people are expecting, is what I would say there.
Mhm.
So I think we need to be prepared. I'm not convinced we're going to get a huge stock market crash. We might get one, and it might recover quickly. Years ending in six are not as bullish as years ending in five, and there are some down years. But again, that's how I see it right now, is that we should be prepared for something quite interesting coming up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've pointed it out in previous, I think I wrote toward the end of last year, I wrote a report on, 2026. I mean, you go back 60 years, you get back to 1966, and there was a significant stock market wobble in 1966,
Yeah.
quite significant, around, I
It
think
was, it
around
was, yeah.
February, it sort of peaked, and then you had this sort of downturn going into mid-year, which was quite a significant shock in the stock market. And then, of course, you can go back 90 years, you got, 1936, which was the year before the 1937 panic, that sort of came in, so it wasn't necessarily a year ending in six, but the 100-year cycle, I think, flags for years ending in six, because I think when I was looking, well, it does from a land cycle perspective, because you have the peak in the land
Okay.
markets in 1926. We've spoken before in interviews about 1825, and the eruptions from that, which would have spread across into 1826. But 1926, I think, was quite, you had the general strike in the UK from an industrial recession, that happened in 1925, and also the peak of the land market in Florida, which caused the crash in the land market in Florida, rather, from the great
Yeah.
storm that happened there in Miami, which crashed real estate because there'd been so much speculation in the run up. It also caused all the smaller regional banks, which were prevalent in those days, unlike the more monopolistic banking sectors that we have now, but to collapse. And so that, I think this is the worry about it. When you go back into that 100-year cycle, which is such a resonance cycle, it's not necessarily pointing all upwards to 2029. There's stuff that happened prior to that was and certainly into the 1800s, and you would have gone back even further, I'm sure, into.
Well, there is one crisis that I've covered that I haven't seen anybody else discuss that is relevant to a big event, and that goes back even further. So, and it does relate to the same sort of stuff you're talking about now as well. It's directly related to that cycle there as well. So, I think we've got to be prepared. We've got to be prepared. I mean, certainly, if I was sitting here this time last year, I think I met you this time last year, Catherine. Um, but the
No, you hadn't.
2025
That's
year,
true. Yeah, that's
so
true.
the
Yeah.
2025 forecast for me was a no-brainer. The year was going to close up with a little bit of a scuffle in between. We got the Trump tariffs. We had our histogram system really clearly pointing that out last January, February. We got the pullback, and then the rest has been history really. This year is a little bit harder to forecast. I think it's going to be a little softer, and I think we need to be a little bit more prepared. And it's pretty obvious why. And the forecasting stuff I did before. I wrote all that in December, in fact, late November, December. So it was before, Trump even moved on Venezuela. So, at that point, everything was pretty robust and people were talking about everything's great. Maybe a bit of a problem in AI sector and all the rest of it. But
Mm.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, the same with rates going down. Everyone was like, "Oh, rates are going to continue
Yeah,
going down." Then all of a sudden, I mean, thankfully, my forecast has always been for rates to tighten. Sort of, that they were never going to just continue going down in my forecast. But yeah, this time last year we hadn't met. Actually, I'm very grateful to the subscriber that reached out to me and said, "Oh, you should reach out to Andrew and interview Andrew."
should we give him a shout out? Who was it? Or you can tell me privately.
Richard Meredith, who is a long
Richard,
time
thank you so much, Richard. This has
uh,
been great. I
a
really
long-time
appreciate it.
associate of mine, and actually has been a great mentor to me in what I've done. He worked quite closely with us at Prosper Australia for a while, and has been an avid cycle watcher, and certainly was a watcher of your cycles. In fact, it was Richard that encouraged me to reach out to David Murray when I originally reached out to David.
Right.
And also said to me, you should interview Richard Smith, if no one's watched that interview, gosh, my subscribers, please go back and
You
watch
got to
that. I
see
know.
Richard. Yeah, I work very closely with Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Because
you
we
were the
would,
one that enabled, the
yeah.
email intro when I said to you, "Well, can you introduce us?" I mean, I do a lot. The trouble is I pump out because I said, oh, when I started Land Cycle Investor, I'll put content out every week, and then I'm so desperate to sort of make the product work and everything that the content each week ends up being quite significant content, and then I'll throw a long interview with, and I think people sort of get overloaded. They can't watch them all, but if you're watching this, go back and watch that interview with Richard Smith because he was such a nice guy to interview. Like what a really interesting history has got himself, and very interesting concept of what cycles mean and why we should look at them. Which was outside of the financial jargon that we sort of talk about making money from it. So yeah, it was great. It's been a real ride. Sort of doing that, and you've brought so much benefit. Honestly, Andrew, like just having these conversations with you, it not only enables me to deepen my own analysis and sort of look at it from a land cycle perspective, but it brings an incredible amount of value to my subscribers. And it's been an absolute honor to be able to introduce you to them and to give you, a platform where you can talk to them. And I encourage everybody to go and get your annual report. And the reason that I'm saying this isn't just, I think cycles are tremendously exciting. And as I said, you're somebody who's got a lot of experience in it, but it's because I know that the effort that goes into it behind the scenes, and not just the effort, but the excitement. I mean, one of the things you were saying to me yesterday was, oh, let me send it to you. And well, hang on a second, I won't send it to you. Let me do the interview because I want to see your reaction, because I found some amazing things, and it is this, oh, this is amazing. And then putting those forecasts out there and just seeing whether we're going to measure up to it. And I think I said to you, I don't think you charge enough for your report. I think, for what what you're offering there is incredible value, as I feel with all of the things that you offer, really, particularly your trading course, which you sell. And again, these are for people, and you'll have your say in a second on this, I'm sure, but for people that have got you need to have when you're a trader, you have to have a strategy in place. You have to have experience trading. Even when you know the cycles, there is a mindset, and you have to have some granular knowledge in trading to be able to go and trade them successfully. Knowing them isn't enough to be able to advantage financially from them, and that there's no, quick code book. These are tools for people to use to benefit their own trading thing. And when they have those tools in place, then your report has really become invaluable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's there. It's the same course, the same techniques that I used to run a very successful hedge fund with. I'm not running one at the moment. Having said that, I was approached and did was an interview. It was kind of, I don't know if I want to do it, but they kind of are inviting me to go on. Well, they are inviting me to go on board and run another fund. And these are the same techniques that work. And, the last year around a professional fund, we closed up 34%, beat the S&P by 47%. There was a minimal, the risks were very small. And that course is out there. We put it on at a very affordable amount. Why? Well, because we want to help people out. That's it. But we're here to provide this information. The report is out there. Catherine, you've got a link. It's $199, full and final. It's 63 pages. There's a lot of information in there. I'll really give you an understanding about what's really going on. We've talked about some of it now. You'll see other cycles. You'll see what's going on in different other parts of the world. And I enjoy doing it because I get to do interviews with people like you, Catherine. We have a lot of fun and we get to help a lot of people out. And at some point, I'm looking forward to meeting people. Now we've been giving shouts out to people like Richard. Let's give a shout out to our mutual friend that you introduced me to, Aaron, who's just been incredible. So I know he'll appreciate it. And no, seriously, he's been helping with the year ahead report. You'll love it. And the feedback, it's only been out. It's not even been out. It's been out 10 hours looking at this. I've had very little sleep. Just like you, Catherine, you're ready to crash out. We've already had tremendous feedback. I actually think it's one of the best reports we've ever created. Actually, this interview's been one of the best interviews we've ever done. We've had a really good rant here. So, so I think you guys are very lucky to be in with Catherine and supporting her work and profiting and benefiting from it. Because this is great because we get into a lot more depth here than I do with anybody else, and we get some really good questions coming here.
There are no, it's all free form on these interviews. That's why with David Murray I can go into things like aliens and the depths of physics and subjects which I know that people get very sensitive when they're out there on YouTube and to sort of what subjects they want to sort of investigate. But I love sort of giving you free rein to really go and really get into this. It's so important. But yeah, a shout out to Aaron. Aaron is someone, again, a subscriber of mine that has helped me so much reached out to me and gave me a lot of help and with my own website, because it's when you're not technically minded, it's not easy. And then I introduced him to you and he's been very helpful to you. Yeah,
and he's very knowledgeable about all this stuff as well. He's got,
I mean,
he's a great guy.
I've got brilliant subscribers. I'll just say that. I mean, everyone that reaches out to me, thank you for, for people that do reach out to me and send me emails. I do get around to them eventually. I can't always answer them immediately, but, I've got an amazing subscriber base that are very passionate and very loyal and, do give me a lot of feedback and reach out to me and send me bits of information. And honestly, without that, without people like that sort of come in and in the synchronicities, sort of help us with this work, it's all a web, that gradually builds this knowledge and it's great to be a part of it. So, yes. Anyway, congratulations on the report.
Thank you very much.
Log off so that I can get some sleep and finish my little piece tomorrow to sort of go out and complement this. But encourage everybody to go and get it. I think what you just said then is really important. You said it to me, which is, this is one of the best reports I've ever written. It's one of the most important that we can look at because, we are now at the peak of the land cycle, which we've been talking about for so many years. And, everyone's been saying this is, Fred thinks that this downturn is going to be ginormous in his words. And I know Melody Wright, a US expert, I must get her back on the show, has been talking about how this is going to be quite a dynamic downturn in the land market. So we'll have to see how it plays out and whether it's going to pull the rug out from underneath us all and it's all going to go by and we're not going to notice anything. And then we'll have to sort of, but we'll sort of see what happens. But yeah, and so I'll have links in my report to your report that people can go and purchase it. So I'd encourage everybody to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll get you back on. And maybe we'll have some subscriber questions then where people can sort of dig in a little
Sure.
more. And as the events are moving very fast now, so no doubt you will be invited. There'll be plenty for you to come back and respond to.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And let me just stress the year ahead report also comes with the part one of the January report, which has got all the time cycles for the balance of the month. It's full and final. It's $199. You're not obligated to do anything else, and that's it. So, and like you say, Catherine, hopefully other people find it's worth 1,000 times more than that to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I really think these are, the effort and everything that goes into it. It's really important. But yeah, thank you very much, and we will meet again soon for
We
that
will.
song.
So have a great new year, everybody, and thank you so much, Catherine. It's been well, I was going to say it's been a lot of fun. I don't know if that's the right word in the context of the geopolitical global context, but it has been fun hanging out, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. And thank you again.
Yeah, it's the worry about the history that we're entering now. So we'll see what happens.
We live in interesting times, as some
We do.
listeners would say.
We do. Okay, we'll talk again soon. Bye.
All right, absolutely. Bye for now.